Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today, we have our honored guest, Dr. David White, as we discuss pediatric dentistry, orthodontics, and oral surgery trifectas, clinical pearls, and the importance of maintaining relationships. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
All right, welcome back to the show, listeners. Today we have a special episode recording live from Sandy, Utah. I say it's live. It's obviously recorded, but it's live for us. At any rate, we're here today with Brian Anderson, Chris Teeters, myself, and then our special guest, Dr. David White, who's a close personal friend of mine. We go way, way back to our college days. And what's nice about this trip is it's something that we've done every year for the past 6 years. And it's been an opportunity for guys to just come together and reconnect and, talk about, guy stuff and have a good time. This year, we were fortunate enough to visit our old alma mater, BYU, which is where Brian, David, and I all went to college together. Took in a basketball game from the fourth row, which was like quite an experience. David hooked us up with those tickets. But we're just very grateful that every year we have had the opportunity to do this and recognize how important that is just to reconnect with your male peers. So welcome to the show, guys. David, Brian, how's the weekend been for you so far?
Well, it's something that, we always look forward to. Andy, touching on what you said, I think that it's really good to reconnect with, people you have a history with and to reconnect with your roots. And you mentioned, male peers, right? It'd be the same for female peers or just whatever you need to feel connected with who you are at your core. That's so important to prioritize. And I think, in modern culture, I think in some ways we're always trying to overcome what we naturally are in some way to prove that we can supersede, the limitations that we think are placed upon us. But I think there's also some wisdom to saying, hey, yeah, I need to connect with my roots. And it's healthy and it's important. So for us, we like doing this thing together it's like a guys weekend. It's always energizing and rejuvenating and something that I think is lost in modern culture to a large degree. So it's really great to prioritize it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to do this. And as you were saying, I think it's one of those phrases, but you don't make old friends, and having friends that you've known for 20 years, there's just you laugh in a way that you don't laugh around other people. I mean, we were talking about it, but you get to that point where you start laughing so hard, your cheeks start hurting. And you're able to, and each other's, weaknesses, each other's strengths. You're able to talk in a way and give counsel in a way that you can't with somebody you've just met or that you've only known for, a year or two. And so, I really value this time together. And I think it's important that everybody has these experiences where you reconnect with friends you've known for a long time.
Well, I mean, and this stuff doesn't just happen. I mean, they were talking about that a little bit today, how it's tough as, we're all fathers, we're all business owners. There's a lot of responsibilities and, in our families, a lot of times our needs come last. And we have made this work because we plan this almost a year in advance. As soon as we get home, I'm sure we're going to be setting the date for the next year. And, we've made that clear with our families that this is the one time of the year where this is a priority, because it is important for us to reconnect with that masculine energy, have the kind of jokes that we can't say, all the time. It's not even about that. I don't think we're overly inappropriate. But
speak for yourself.
Not overly, yes, not overly. I guess that's a subjective measurement. But it's nice that it has been made a priority, and I'm really grateful to our wives who make this, who recognize the importance of reconnecting. And I think that when we go back, we're refreshed. It makes us better father figures, better husbands. You need to connect with your male peers on a somewhat exclusive level. So, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, this nature of we call it second half of life. We can call it, just growth. But I remember on one of the first trips we came out here, I was struggling a lot with my startup practice and, just feeling like I wasn't where I wanted to be and felt kind of dejected about the whole thing. And I remember talking with these guys here and I said, well, David actually is the one who pointed out that like I'm catastrophizing, I'm letting my anxiety take over, and he recommended this book, which I think came up in conversation earlier today. David, do you want to tell us about that book? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, for sure. So, a lot of people have heard of Dale Carnegie because of his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But one of his lesser known books, but I think equally important, in fact, I think it should be standard reading for every single person, is his other book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And, I was able to recommend it to Andy because somebody had recommended it to me at a time when I really needed it. My first 2 months in practice were probably the 2 hardest months of my life. I'm not somebody who cries like regularly, but I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I was driving home regularly crying on my way home from work. You go from the stress you go from seeing 6 patients a day in residency to seeing 50 patients a day in private practice. In residency, you've got 8 different faculty that you can turn to and say, hey, what would you do here right now? But when you're in private practice, you don't have that luxury. And so you've got to make decisions on the fly. You have to know how to interact with a parent and handle a difficult situation when you've never had the experience to do it, right? And so those first few months, and to add on to that, how to interact with staff members, how to handle cases that aren't going well, and you've never handled that situation exactly. So it was just a very, very, very stressful time in my life. And somebody recommended it to me, and I mean, it literally transformed my mindset. There's so many great points, and I recommend everybody listening should, it's been out for 100 years or so. So it's open source now. You can get PDFs of it for free, but it just helped me analyze my problems. Right. Cause I think so often we'll have an issue come up and you immediately start jumping to the what ifs, and the what ifs are always the worst case scenario that have a 99.99% chance of not happening. But then you start, you become paralyzed because your fear of what if, and being able to stop and say, okay, well, let's say that did happen. What are the solutions to that problem? And, if I had to do it. And so anyways, there's a lot of things in there, but that was, again, something I recommended to you. And it's something I recommend to everybody just because it really just helps you problem solve, handle the issues, and understand that, a lot of the things that you worry about aren't going to actually happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and to your point, I think on the one hand, it gives us a sense of security because we realize, okay, in reality, all of these things can't happen. I mean, the probability, the worst can't happen all at the same time, right? So it helps ground you in that sense. But I think the flip side is like, David, you had said that sometimes you kind of have to imagine, like, well, what if it did happen, right? And guess what? Sometimes it might happen. I think you have to accept that, because I think the flip side of this is we can say, hey, look at all this stuff that never really happens. Like, and you have this expectation, okay, well, none of this will ever really happen then. But I think you have to be willing to step into the reality that, okay, what if it does happen? Oh, here's what I do. And then expect that, well, it still could happen. It probably won't because I'm catastrophizing, but something really bad or something what I perceive as bad might happen. Okay, but you know what? What would happen then? I'll handle it.
Yeah.
Because you've handled everything in your life up until this point.
Exactly.
You've handled it. You've literally come through on the other side.
I think of Morgan Housel in that book, The Psychology of Money. He talks about you want to plan on your plan, not going to plan.
Yeah.
And when you do that, then you're prepared to fall. But when you worry about it, you've basically suffered it twice. And it may not even happen.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then if it doesn't happen, you've suffered it once. And if it does happen, you've suffered it twice. So I think plan on your plan, not according to plan, but don't worry about it because, I think if you change the worrying and the fear into problems that are fun to solve, then it becomes enjoyable. And that's a mind shift. I think that was transformational for me is even if all your problems were solved, you would come up with problems because the mind has to solve things to be novel and to be excited and be happy. And so if you think you can just have all your problems solved for you, then you start worrying about the dog that pooped on your lawn, like you think of like older tired people, like why are they so upset? They have nothing else to care about or think about. So the way I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I'm blessed for these problems and let's have fun solving them.
Yeah. And I mean, to give you a perfect example of something like that could happen to anybody or just start worrying about, it was when I first started taking over some of these patients, there was at least like 5 to 10 where I looked at it and I was like, this is a potential lawsuit, right? There's some of these cases aren't going well. And, you start going down the fear just plummet of if I get sued, then I might not be able to this. And I'm going to, how am I going to support my children if I can't, you start going down this. And then you start to realize, okay, well, that's why we have insurance, for instance. And even if we did sue, like, even if I did get sued, then there's a solution to that problem. So it's important to stop and realize that.
And there's a risk to everything, right? There's a risk to everything, even if it's opportunity cost. So you learn to live life with risk because you can't avoid having risks. And I think we try to set ourselves up to believe somehow that we can live in this risk-free world, or we can set up these parameters within which we'll be safe. Well, kinda, yeah, kinda. And Chris, to your point, when I was serving a mission for my, the church that I grew up in, there was a quote that I sometimes would memorize quotes when I was walking around and just, there's no one around, there's no one to talk to, and you're just trying to, learn and better yourself. And this quote that I memorized was, "Worry is the price you pay in advance for most of the things that never happen in life." And I realized that I'm paying that price.
Like that.
And again, but I think I took that too far. The part of me that didn't want to pay the price, okay, most of this is never going to happen. But I think as a more seasoned, experienced man now, some things have happened. And some of the things I, at least in part, orchestrated. Well, I would say everything. I at least in part orchestrated everything. But some of the things I was actually more at fault for, right? And so I think you realize that, okay, well, no, sometimes things do happen in life. And you'll always, if you can be great, like if I can be grateful in this moment right now, sitting here with you guys, talking about this weekend, talking about orthodontics and what we've learned and all this stuff, well, then I'm in a pretty good spot. If I can be grateful, if I can be confident, I'm in a pretty good spot. So therefore, everything that happened up until this point, I've handled, quote unquote, handled, right? So then, okay, whatever comes, I'll be able to handle. What it might mean this. Yes, it might mean this, and it might mean that. But I don't want. Oh, there it is. You don't want that to happen. So you're attached to something that you think is bad. So it's really the attachment that's the most punishing thing. You suffer the most because of the attachment. And so I think, a healthy perspective is like, well, I'm going to do everything I can to try to, I know what I want. I know what I want, first of all. Okay. And so I'm going to live my life to try to be aligned with what I want, whatever that means. And then I will accept what happens because I'm not God and I can only do what I can do. And it's a more peaceful way to live. You're less afraid about what will happen because, hey, I've already done everything I can do. But there's bad things happening. Yeah, I guess it is. And so if it's quote unquote bad, everything that's been bad up until this point in my life, I've somehow been able to transform as I become aware of it. So I will be able to transform that too by the grace of God, however you feel that is. But I think it's a much healthier mindset. And I was talking with David this morning. It's like we have the privilege of being able to even have these conversations because we've experienced enough of life that we know, like, it's okay. At the same time, like, work really hard. Like, younger generation, work really hard. I mean, do what you can to put yourself in a great spot. You want to do it. Don't. Okay, let's put it this way. Do everything you can to not screw up because life will screw you up regardless. Life will happen regardless. So don't give it a greater chance of messing things up. It's going to happen anyway. Don't assist it. Don't assist life in destroying you because stuff is going to come. So you do everything you can to minimize that.
Right.
But it will happen. And guess what? If you do assist it, that hurts, but learn from it and it can actually make you better.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics. You won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
It sounds like you're describing Stoicism a lot, and I think that Dale Carnegie was definitely drawing on Stoicism when he basically says, if you do want to plan ahead, it's not about not planning. It's not about not being responsible. It's just about that not worrying, not letting the anxiety take over that. And the mental exercise you want to do is accept the worst case scenario, like truly accept it. And that's very much related to the Stoic concept of memento mori. So remember, we all die. Okay. And if you can accept your death, which is the scariest thing, that we can contemplate, arguably the worst thing can happen. But if we can accept that and come to peace with it, then it doesn't have that power over us to control it. And the journey to that inevitable destination is all that more enjoyable because of it. A related concept here is if you can plan ahead and understand the possible ramifications of your actions and then make a plan to get to the most optimal one, but accept that it might not work out. And if it doesn't work out, then you're still going to be okay. That's where you want to get to avoid that anxiety. This reminds me of the other thing we talked about this morning. Now, you guys, we were talking about dental school, and we were talking about, achieving. David, you were phrasing this as like, well, when is it enough? I'm this high performer on so many levels, and at what point does it become enough? And we were describing our dental school experiences, and I think we were a little bit different there. So, David, I want you to describe for me, what was your mentality when you approached academics and let's call it work-life balance when you were in your 20s in dental school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with going back to just childhood and kind of how I grew up. But I had an older brother that, was a high achiever. Graduated, I think, magna or summa cum laude from Harvard. He was the oldest child in the family of 5, and I was the youngest. And so you're following in the footsteps. And so there's a certain level of expectation for what I had to do to be successful. And so, my whole life, I basically was at school studying or, playing sports. I did things. It wasn't like, work hard, play hard, but I was working every chance I had. And, and for instance, like once I got to college, I was at school from 7 a.m. till 12 p.m. almost every day. And
I remember that. I was with you.
Andy was my roommate in college, so he knows.
Well, you weren't with him. You were doing.
I clearly was not with him from 7 to 12. I don't have the attention span for that. But David was the most intense studier I have ever seen. I mean, I told him that this weekend. He rubbed off on me in some way. I think that in a lot of ways I've been a mentor to David through the years, but
he likes to think of himself that way.
I got I
do less. Just don't do anything.
To be fair, that work ethic rubbed off on me. It was what I needed. David was the only guy I knew who would get out of breath while he studied. But anyway, continue your story. So 7 to 12 in the library every day. I can attest to that.
It's what's funny. So at BYU, the library starts playing at like 11:45 or 11:20 or 11:50 when the Saints go marching home, and so that serenaded me every night on the way home. But No, I think the idea was I didn't know. I knew at some point, like, and actually Andy, like we were talking about, Andy was, I did follow in his footsteps to a certain degree. I was pre-med while he was pre-dental. And, I saw his, because of him, I started considering dentistry and started shadowing different dental specialties and things like that. But
hey, hold on, let me just interject. Before this podcast, I think Andy said, David always had the better work ethic. I always had the better ideas when describing this very shift.
Hey, we ended up in the same place. But once I had decided I wanted to become an orthodontist at some point in college, I didn't know how hard I had to work to become it. I just knew that I was going to give it 100% the entire way, because if I didn't actually accomplish it, then I would always regret it. Right. So I gave 100% the entire time, and, maybe I could have given 95% or 90% and still, ended up in the same place. But that fear of not getting in pushed me to, those long hours in the library and things like that. And, in life, there's always some next step, right? So in high school, it's about getting into a good college. College is getting into dental school. Dental school, it's getting into a good residency. Residency, it's getting in a good job. And I think we've been talking.
And then it's, what kind of a house can you get? Well, how many houses can you get? And then, what next thing can I do? Right? It never ends.
Right.
It's this thing that can't be satiated. And that's what I think is so great about these trips too, to bring it back to that, is we've had these conversations this whole weekend. We've talked about how much do you need to push, and what perspective was I approaching this from? Because before, the podcast, we were chatting about this, and we chatted about it in the sauna some yesterday too. And so we're just talking about real life stuff. And kind of what we came to is, in a lot of ways, David and I, you and I were similar. Like, hey, I can't live with myself if I don't give 100% and don't get in. Like to ortho, for example.
Right.
If I give less than 100% and I don't get in, I won't be able to live with myself. But hey, if I can give 100%, I can at least live with the version of myself that gave 100 and failed. Okay. Because I know I did everything I could, right?
Right.
In a way. And Andy, I think you said, well, it was interesting because you came out from a different perspective. Tell us.
Anyone who I went to pretty much any part of school with understands I kind of approach academics slightly differently than the average. So I'll tell you again, it kind of comes back to know thyself. I have a relatively short attention span. I think that's why orthodontics is partially a good fit for me, is because I can spend a minute on each patient and then just keep moving. But it is very difficult for me to sit in even one lecture for an entire hour and stay focused that entire time. My mind wanders. It's just really hard, but I can learn this stuff if it's accelerated. I learned this. You remember accounting with Norm Nemro, David?
Yeah.
So
you could speed it up.
That was the first class. It was a new technology. It was an online class or a hybrid class. And he had all the recordings of the lectures on CD-ROM. And I learned this new feature. You can speed up the CD-ROM to up to 3 times the actual speed. And I remember him saying, if you do this, some people will find that you actually retain the knowledge better. And I was like, well, I would like to get this done in half the time. So I sped it up to 2. And it was I was engaged because you have no other choice. It's it's going so fast, you cannot miss anything. But what's best about it is it's a short burst and then it's over. And then it's I miraculously, I retained a lot more than if I'd sat through at regular speed. I listened to all my podcasts at sped up. I listened to YouTube videos sped up. Everything is sped up. So when it comes to school, when it comes to academics, when that's not an option, I found that if I would take the lecture notes or the lecture slides, which are all available, I would actually skip class and go and read the lecture slides on my own in about half the time, retain the knowledge better than if I was sitting through a class. And then I would go about my work-life balance. And speaking of that work-life balance, I remember when I went into dental school, I knew it was going to be the biggest challenge of my life. But I also wanted to go into orthodontics, which we all know is extremely competitive. I mean, when we went through, you had to be top 1% in order to get into ortho. But there was always that person who had straight A's and had all the letters of recommendation, did everything right, and for some bad stroke of luck just didn't match anywhere. And there's one of those in every class. And I remember thinking I have priorities that involve my social life. I have priorities that involve my physical fitness. And I would see a lot of people give that up in the name of going 100% all in on getting into ortho. And I remember thinking, like, in the same way, like, what are you going to regret the most? Which outcome are you going to regret the most? And I thought, if I'm that guy who sacrifices my body, who sacrifices my social life for 4 more years to go all in on an objective that I ultimately don't reach for something completely out of my control, that's the person I cannot afford to be, is the one who lost everything chasing something that was out of my control. So my mentality was sort of a pay yourself first mentality. Like, I'm going to get those things taken care of as efficiently as I can. And then whatever energy I have after that, I'm putting all into academics. But I'm not going to put so much energy into that I'm going to lose out on the things that are within my control that are priorities for me. And I think that's been my way of looking at a lot of things, being a little bit more balanced, well-rounded. And I may not be as like uber successful as these $20 million orthodontists out there, but I do feel happy with that balance, with that, the good mix. I think, Chris, you kind of have a similar mentality in some capacity, but Chris, you're obviously in Phoenix this weekend. You kind of missed out, which, by the way, we did make a new rule that anyone who has missed one of these trips is going to have to be reinitiated on the next one. And if I'm not mistaken, you've missed 2 now. So I'm not going to lie to you, that's going to be hard. David had an idea that I'm not sure we can say on the podcast, but it did involve a certain appendage freezing off. So,
after the sauna. Face down in the snow. Face down in the snow.
I'm picturing like the Terminator, like freeze him with the nitrogen and just like smash him into pieces. Something along those lines, Chris. So just be aware of that.
Just be ready. Well, if you want to come back.
I know the time with the guys means a lot. So, whatever. If I got to do what I got to do, it'll be worth it. # worth it.
You definitely do. You definitely do. But anyway, Chris, tell us about your mentality. I know that you balance a lot. So tell us, just briefly, how do you approach these?
I do now. I'm more like you, Andy, but during dental school, I was definitely a lot more like David. I was not the most gifted when it came to just natural intelligence, but I was willing to work my butt off. I always felt like in order to get 4.0 or be top of the class, you had to be gifted. You had to be able to have a photographic memory, right? Because you're going up against everybody else who wanted to be an orthodontist. But I felt I could probably outwork them. So I did more of the David mentality. Whereas if the guy I know that has the photographic memory is studying for 6 hours, I'm going to study for 8. And I'm going to find ways, like Brian and I discovered things like V-Books, where it will like audio say books to you. And so I recorded myself speaking the dental deck. So I'd listen to that on the way to school and on the way back. When I got home, my head was in a book. I read it as much as I could. I listened to it as much as I could. I didn't know what stuck for me. I just wanted to flood my brain 24/7 with dental material. And it worked. I got to be top of the class by just outworking everybody. And then I learned, I was like, okay, I can do this if I just, work harder than everybody else. But I did sacrifice my health. I did not work out much. My heart was hurting. My blood pressure was off the charts.
Really?
I did.
Because you're like the most like physically fit person I think I know at this point.
I'm making up for it, bro. I'm making up for it. But when I got
let's
out,
let's take it all with a grain of salt too, though, right? Because Chris is actually so capable, like literally so capable that he's going to judge something that he's going to say, well, this wasn't great. What the average person might say, well, that was actually pretty great. Like you actually wrote, in relatively great shape, but you're going to feel it's not in great shape because it's all relative.
Sure. Right. Well, back then it really was.
It's like anything that's a catastrophe, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like back then I'd say I really didn't work out all that much, but now when I was like, okay, I got to sacrifice to get to become an orthodontist. Yeah. And I think that might be the same mentality you had, David, is I had to give up all these things in order to have a shot, because if I don't, and I do Andy's plan, which doesn't work for me, I'm not going to get into ortho. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it. And so once I was in, I was like, okay. And my mentality in ortho was very different. I would do hot yoga in the morning, and I would work out with Brian after clinic, and I felt very balanced. But once you're in, it was like, okay, you're a doctor now. Yeah. part of the team. It wasn't like another rigorous had to earn your keep. You're in, you're good. Just don't slack off too much, obviously. And then when I got out, I was like, okay, I analyzed it more. And I said, okay, now what's important to me? Okay, I've achieved ortho. That's good. I'm solid there. Now I'm going to spend all of my time, or as much as my time, like spending a lot of time thinking to how do I focus on the 6 things most important to me? That's my family, my fitness, my finances, or my work, my music, which, involves relapse and all of that. And then, my faith. So when I'm focusing on how can I maximize those 5, but not spend too much time in any one of those 5 categories, I'm very, very happy. If I spend all my time in ortho, I'm miserable. If I spend all my time doing music, which I love, I'm miserable. It's like, it's too much, right? So I think when we can split our time doing the things that are productive, but fulfill ultimately who you want to become, and you try to eliminate the things that do not serve you, like playing too many video games or watching too much TV or whatever. None of those I do very, very much, unless I'm like on the treadmill, because I got to combine it with something, feel like I'm productive. So I think that part stuck with me, was I always had to feel like I'm productive, but I can vary that productivity and I can spread it out over multiple things. But I felt like you had to kind of sacrifice in dental school to have that shot, unless you're like Andy that can, learn on 3x speed, which is pretty amazing.
One point on that too, that I think is worth pointing out. It's not like I'm some kind of super genius. I mean, well, it's not that I'm not a super genius, but that's just not my point.
He's not, trust me. He's not a super genius.
But I mean, we could debate that another time, but I do want to point out one thing that is important here, which is you guys all had started your families a lot earlier than I did. So like every one of you, I think, had at least one kid while you're going through dental school or at some point during dental school. So I do have to point out in one way, like juggling that on top of all this, like, I did not have to balance family against all this other stuff. So that did free up some time and some, mental bandwidth for me to work.
So Andy,
yeah,
I think one thing that's important here to recognize is every situation is different.
Of course.
Every situation is different. And sometimes we see something and we think, we'll see you mentioned earlier, like the $20 million practice, and we'll somehow start to idealize this or that or the other as if that would even work for us. And have we even taken the time to consider, does that even align with what I want ultimately? Okay, so everyone wants the money side, right? But do you want what goes into that? Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't, then that's not for you. So, and Chris, you mentioned balance, and we've said this before. It comes down to know thyself. I think so. Number one, knowing yourself. What are my priorities? Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you set those priorities. Well, you set up you spend enough time to, and you turn over some rocks. You got to turn over some rocks, and you got to look in some dark places a little bit. Like, what are my actual priorities here? And number 2, and then, so after you've done that, you've prioritized, then to Chris's point, how do you balance that? And we all need to make sure that we have some balance. Mm-hmm. And so I think even to balance this idea of there are multiple ways to do this. And I recognize, like when we were talking this morning and even talking now, like I think, Andy, your approach, honestly, probably is the most healthy, like probably the approach that we should aspire to, but sometimes because of circumstances, because you do have a young family or because you do have this way of learning or that way of learning, sometimes your life has to temporarily go out of balance. Yeah. But you should never plan on that continuing. You should always have, you should always know that it will come back. It will come back to balance somehow, whether it comes crashing down, whether you stuff stuff down, repress stuff, deny stuff, whatever, it's always going to come back to balance. So I think the best thing is to say, hey, sometimes it may need to be imbalanced, but there's going to be a price to pay for that. And I certainly paid the price. I was, Andy, I think, like I said, ultimately when you were talking to us about your perspective, I thought that's a really balanced, healthy way to look at it. Hey, I'm not going to totally sacrifice my health. I'm not going to, hey, I understand that I need a social life. I rely on other people. I'm not an island. So I'm not saying that, like, I don't even like necessarily wish that I'd done it a different way because I did it this way. I can't change this the way. I believe in some degree to fate and of course God's hand. Like, this is what I needed for me to get to this point where I can recognize that balance is essential. And that's now what I need to align myself with. I needed the imbalance to get to the place where I could recognize that balance was crucial. Why? Because in some ways it broke me, not being balanced. It sounds like you too, Chris, like you realized, man, I can't keep doing this, right? So I think it's, if younger people are listening to this, just know that whatever way you think you need to get it there that's in integrity, it's okay as long as you're taking into account what it's going to cost and how you're going to pay for that on the back end. How are you going to balance that on the back end? And there has to be a plan.
I think that comes back to where we are currently. I think kind of each of us, the four of us here on this podcast, is for the three of us that gave 100% for that long period of time. Where do we stop doing that to a point where we can then devote some of that percentage to the other things that are more important, like that are also important in life? And because if you're giving 100% towards certain goals, once you've accomplished those goals, because like right now, let's say the goal was to get to a solid private practice. Okay, so now we're at a solid private practice. Where do we then divert that energy? And again, it's about that balance with family, faith, your physical fitness, things like that. And it comes back to also, we start to see people that have other practices that have, like uber successful practices. And you start to think, well, I could maybe do that. That could be the next thing I devote myself to. And it's really hard to dial yourself back and pull back and say, just because I can doesn't mean I should, right?
It's the ego, right? Because like, what is this? If this is to serve my ego at the expense of my true self, you're barking up the wrong tree every time.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
Well, I think that one of the quotes that we said this weekend in that regard is comes from Jurassic Park. I posted this on the forums a couple times. You know what I'm talking about? Like Ian Malcolm, when he talks about how they push the boundaries of science, arguably too far, which is kind of the theme of the book. And he says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think about whether they should. And I want to come back to your experience here, David, because you and I talked about this, I think it was about 2 years ago. So you started in a pediatric office. You took over ortho in a pediatric office, and you partnered. I think you were 50-50 partners. I'll let you explain that. But
sure.
After that, I mean, for a lot of people, that's like, well, that's the dream right there. But then you started having some other opportunities to expand your practice, including bringing on multiple specialties and maybe even other locations. And you were asking me a while ago, like, should I do this? And, guide us through that thought process. Tell us what you ended up ultimately choosing and why. But tell us about that thought process and, what is the right answer there? Just because you can do something, how do you decide if you should?
Right, exactly. So just a little background on myself and my practice for those that don't know me. So I got out of residency about 10 years ago, and I joined as an associate to an orthopedo practice. So it was already orthopedo, and it had been orthopedo for 30 or 40 years. So I was just an associate. I was an associate for 2 years. Then the pediatric owner of the whole office, basically had seen that I'd done good work and knew that I was going to do my best to grow the business. And so he offered partnership to me. And it was a staged buy-in. So I bought 40% at first, and then I bought 11% more. And since then, so there's essentially currently there's 2 pedo partners, and then there's a pedo associate. And then one of the things that I was able to bring as a value add to the office was helping incorporate oral surgery into the office. And this is something, if anybody is considering this, I would love to go over it in more detail. People are welcome to reach out to me, just because it's been a great value add for our office.
Can you give us just maybe like a 2-minute, summary, if that's even possible?
Yeah. So the basic point is it's easier to do if you already have the pedo aspect because of gas lines and things like that, with a relatively minimal capital expenditure, buying certain things like monitors and some of the units and the equipment, the tools. You're able to generate new income for the office that you could use it on days when you're not there. So, for instance, if our pedo doctors are there 4 days a week, the oral surgeon comes the 5th day. So you're utilizing your space. And one of the great benefits is that the cost, the expenses, the overhead for doing oral surgeries are really low. You've got gauze, you've got lidocaine, but once you've bought that equipment and you've done the investment, the overhead's really low. And so we can afford to pay the oral surgeon 40 to 50%, which is, depends on what they're offering, what they're bringing to the table, whether they're bringing an assistant, whether they're supplying the drugs that they use. But that ratio of 40 to 50% still generates a lot of income for the office.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
But with regards to capital expenditure, so I mean, obviously I'm thinking gas lines, nitrous lines, that's already present in a pediatric office. Your average ortho practice is probably not going to have that stuff. But in addition to that, my office is open concept, like a lot of people's are. So just like an open bay, it's a line of chairs. And I've always wondered if that is conducive to oral surgery. Do you use private rooms for the oral surgery, and how does that work?
Yeah. So again, it comes down to the already being a pedo office really makes it easier because the pedo had in our office. Yeah. We have 3 operatories, and we were fortunate that my business partner, when he built the building, he made a lot of extra space for those rooms. And so there's plenty of room for having extra people in the room plus having the equipment. And so, so obviously you wouldn't be doing open bay surgeries. It's got to be, but for somebody who is an orthodontist, there could be, if you wanted to invest in it, getting the gas lines and things like that. Most people's consult rooms would potentially function for that, right? Mm-hmm. You just have to get obviously there's expense. You've got to get the suction, all those things. But, the space, that you might have enough room in most.
I wonder if it'd be off-putting during the exam, though. You're like bringing someone in, they see a bunch of surgical stuff while you're giving a kid an exam. Maybe it doesn't matter.
They're going to be like, anyone who's done that? Those Invisalign ads were right. They are pulling teeth. They are.
Do you know anyone who's done that?
Well, a lot of stuff you can wheel out, right? You could potentially have stuff that wheels in and out.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
So
it's not necessarily
just kind of hide the lines or cover the lines and make it. Yeah.
So you had the capital expenditures pretty much covered, so you bring it in. It's a good margin, both for the surgeon and for you, David. Sorry to interrupt. Let's continue.
No, that was great. Yeah. So, but basically, I think thanks for doing that though, just because I think it gives opportunity for anybody who is considering doing it to reach out to me, because I'm happy to talk about how we've done it and how it's been successful for us.
Sure.
But
that's awesome.
So then we added that first. So then we went from orthopedo to orthopedo oral surgery. And it's one of these situations where we were, you start to think, again, that mindset of I'm going to give 100%, you start seeing other people with multiple offices and you're like, oh, well, I can do that. And so I started to look at various opportunities, and kind of at that point, I decided not to do it because, I after consulting people, so many people came back and said, don't do a second office. When you do a second office, it just adds stress.
So many times.
It adds stress. It's not worth it, And so what happened though, is we had an opportunity that was just like one of those just too good to pass up opportunities, where there was a pediatric dentist who the landlord was not renewing the lease. So we were able to take over the space, and with a minimal investment of maybe $100,000 to $200,000 of, equipment and supplies and stuff, we were able to have a $750,000 build out or something. And so it was one of those things that fell into our lap. And when you're asking the question, why did we end up doing it ultimately? It was because I had partners I could share the load. And I think that's one of the key things. I knew that I wasn't going into this by myself. And so with that new office, we were each a third owners in it. But we each divide and conquer. And I know that my responsibility, for instance, is marketing. So I do a lot of the school visits, a lot of the preschool. I'm when I'm working in the afternoons, a lot of mornings I'm going to the preschools and giving presentations. And but we divide and conquer. So I know I don't have to handle all the billing or all the like handling insurance and just various things. Like the other partners are taking care of that. So I think understanding that if you're going to undertake something like adding a second or third office, do you have the support structure in terms of people that are really able to take care of things that you aren't going to be able to do or do well?
Because with partners, that makes a lot of sense.
How's that going for you, David? Like, where are you in the process now? And have you found that this is something that you are happy that you went for? Are you starting to feel kind of the stress, any buyer's remorse there?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's again where it starts to come down to a couple things. Number one, determining that if I was to do this, I also needed to be more efficient with my main office. Because my main office, I was seeing patients 4 days a week, and I realized that I could with very minimal increased stress at that office, be able to switch to 3 days a week. And that frees up the time at the other offices. So number one, it was determining, okay, if I'm going to do this, I have to be more efficient in my main office. Number two, and again, like I said, I did it with the mindset that it wasn't going to be forever for me being right now I'm the only orthodontist, and there's now 3 offices, and but there's 4 pediatric dentists. And so the goal for me is to eventually bring on another ortho associate or partner at some point. So again, what I looked at is it's a short-term sacrifice for a long-term benefit, which is, my plan for the next 2 to 3 years is to grow these offices and then bring that person in and be able to share, again, lighten the load. So I wouldn't have done it if I was going to have to handle it by myself. I think that's one of the keys is if you're considering opening up a second or third office, are you planning on being the only person? Because in that situation, I think, most of the time it's going to make your life a lot more complicated with less, that marginal benefit. Like, if you're working 30% harder to make 10% more money, that just doesn't make sense. And so,
plus the diminishing returns on top of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and one thing we talked about this weekend too was Econ 101. And you guys mentioned that you took Econ from Professor Curl. I took it from a guy named Milton who served in the Reagan administration, like a high up econ.
That was the remedial class, if I'm not mistaken.
Hey, I don't talk about those. It was the honors class.
The people that couldn't handle
the ones that were struggling.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was Econ 110, by the way. I wouldn't expect a Milton student to remember that, but
I did take 101.
Oh, you took 101. I don't think that was available to David and I, because we actually scored well enough to get into the actual class. By the way, David, Econ 110.
We don't need it. Nobody needs nobody needs to hear about this.
Hold on. What's so great about these trips too? And Chris, we missed you, man. But what you missed out on was these guys are like a married couple. And I said to him yesterday, I'm like, what's so great about you guys? You've known each other for so long, and you genuinely, I can see how you drive each other nuts.
It's a love-hate.
But because you actually love the other person, you can gracefully kind of forgive it and just sort of roll your eyes like, okay, well, that's Andy being Andy. Okay, well, that's you know how David gets, Brian. And
I don't know how graceful it is, but yes, I get your point.
Well, it always is when there's love involved and there's an enduring friendship. It really. But last night we were at this basketball game, and Andy and David started arguing about who got the higher score.
The higher
Econ 110. The higher A.
We both got A's.
I think Andy said, I got a 96 and you got a 94. I'm like, you guys remember what percentage you got? You actually remember what percentage you got? You're arguing about it.
That doesn't ring a bell.
I remember because I'm the one with a 96. I don't expect a 94 to have that good of a memory, but
but we were talking about,
I get it.
We were talking about utility, right? That there's a decreasing utility. The more of it, and I think I remember from that course is like, okay, well, if you have a Snickers bar, and you're really hungry and you've just exerted yourself and you haven't eaten in hours and you deserve this. Gosh, that first one tastes so good.
And you're willing to pay $5.65, which is what I paid for my Snickers bar at
plus
Snowbird.
tip.
Exactly. Plus tip, right.
you don't mind just tapping on the screen, can ask you a few questions.
Ask you a few questions.
Bar,
Turn this
50% tip.
I'm like, a soda costs $8. I'm not going to give you a tip.
That I served for myself. I grabbed the cup.
Yeah,
I filled the soda in there. You took my credit. You didn't even check my credit card. I tapped my credit card.
You didn't tap the credit card.
Yeah. Diminishing returns, like the second bar is good still, the third and fourth and so on. So you reach a certain point where you think, well, yeah, is this even worth it? Like, am I enjoying this enough to do this? And I think, something that I've really loved is doing this podcast. Like for me, this podcast, sure, there's more, and we're all busy, and we had to pull up a Google Calendar and like, okay, what days can we actually do this on? And there are so few days that actually work. Yeah. I mean, it's where it's like actually works with the schedule. But like, I genuinely, like, I love having these conversations. It's fun, and this is stuff that I think needs to be looked at, needs to be discussed. And it's really great. But so for me, this is, there's a lot of utility here. Now, if we were doing these twice a week, well, there's
nobody would listen. There would be zero listens.
Exactly. So I think the point is, we have to, again, comes back to balance. What's the right balance for me? And you have to know you to know what that is. So
right. And
there's a lot of self-work. There's a lot of self-analyzation that needs to be, you need to spend the time doing that, or else it will catch up to you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think it's important when coming back to this, expanding to 2 or 3 offices is starting with the end in mind. It's not just finding yourself doing something without a plan of where you're going to be in 3 years, 5 years. What's your support structure going to be? How are you going to manage your time? Because oftentimes we end up putting more on our plate without a way of getting rid of it. Right. And that's where people get stuck, and that's where the stress comes from. And that's where, the regret and all those things. And so really trying to avoid that is starting with the end in mind. That's from the Alexanders.
Yeah.
So
yes.
That's a great way to plan.
Does it support your goals? Yep. Does it support your end goals and who you want to become? Like you said, you can always make more money. You can always open more offices. Is the stress going to be worth it to push the needle just a little bit more and the diminishing returns and all that? Or do we go back to balance like we've been talking about this podcast?
Well, so speaking of, Andy, you were talking about death earlier, and I got to get these guys to the airport because they're both flying out today. So I'm going to drop them off at the airport. So we got to kind of wind this down. And so I wanted to touch back on death. And you said at some point, like, you have to accept, you didn't say these words, but essentially accept the inevitability of your death.
Memento mori. Just remember that we all die.
Stoics.
Yep.
Stoics, yes.
Stoicism.
What has been, I would say, revolutionary to me in the last few years is understanding that accepting death isn't only literal death. Yes, it is literal death. It absolutely is literal death. And the older we become, the more we appreciate that our time is finite.
Yep.
So our time is now more valuable because we have less of it, and we understand that there is an end to it. But we also need to understand, I think, this idea of figurative death. And death will happen. I won't escape it, but I'm not going to let it cheat me by my own failure to appreciate its inevitability. Right. So we're talking about, like, maybe you open a practice and it fails. Well, that's a form of death. Okay. But guess what? There's always going to be new life. New life is going to spring up. There's always going to be a quote unquote resurrection, so to speak. And so if you understand this cycle and this pattern, what I found is you don't appreciate life less. You actually, by accepting that death is inevitable, you appreciate it more. Why? Because you do plan. Why? Because you know it's finite. Because you know eventually it's going to catch you. It is going, whatever. Even your office, you think, oh, I've got this great office. It's got this great plan. Well, at some point, that partnership's going to break up.
Right.
At some point, the Beatles break up. Right. Everything dies. Everything passes away. Everything ends. So what am I going to do to preserve this as long as I can? Because why? Because it matters. On some level, life matters. I mean, it's precious. Okay. So knowing that it's going to end, how can I appreciate it to the most and get the most out of it? So yeah, life is always going to struggle to continue to exist, right? So there's always going to be this resistance to death. But I think when you accept it on some level, there's all these deaths. Like night is a death of the day. And then guess what? The next morning, the sun comes up. Winter is the death of life. And so, but guess what? Then the spring happens. I think remembering that in our lives, that happens every day in our lives. It's not only literal death. And then you can live with some faith that, hey, guess what? This bad thing, like this thing that we're catastrophizing about, right? We talked about it earlier. We talked about how before the podcast, I was saying, I did this one lab, class at BYU, and I had somehow missed a station. So every single question was off by one. And I got to the end, and I realized, oh my gosh, I missed one question. So every question, and I just gave it to TA. I did this, but I missed a question. Can you please? And I left thinking I totally got an F, and now I'm not going to get into dental school, and then I can't become an orthodontist, and my life is over. When you realize like how silly that is, but even if that did happen, well, what if I did get the F? Oh shoot. Well, I probably would still be able to get into dental school because I had straight A's otherwise. Yeah. Right. And that's an aberration. Okay. So I can handle that. But what if I didn't get into dental school? What then? Well, that'd be a death of my dream of getting into dental school and becoming, yes, I would die, but something else would be reborn.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
In our last few minutes here, we had a really good discussion that was initiated by a post on Orthodontic Pearls by Vladimir Leon, which was your co-resident, Chris and Brian.
Great guy,
and this is a pertinent topic. I know that we've all talked about that a lot this weekend. We've talked about it a lot in general, but it's the concept of this DSO or OSO and selling. So he posts about the Say No to the DSO podcast, which is basically a CPA and an MBA who are challenging Chip Fitchner, who is a practice broker and for large practice sales. And it was a very interesting discussion, especially for me, the last 20 minutes of the second episode where, they really got confrontational. And one of the points that was brought up, which I don't feel was articulated quite well, was this idea of comparing the numbers. So they go over how the average orthodontist is not that financially savvy. We don't really understand how to evaluate these things. We can have some idea, but for most of the time, we're getting a little bit of smoke and mirrors, and we don't know any better. Arguably, that's part of the reason to use a broker in order to interpret this stuff for you. But even in that dynamic, there's an imbalance of information in which we could potentially get taken advantage of. So one of these concepts was the idea that of an immediate exit with a lower multiple versus a higher multiple with a longer work back. And what I think it was the CPA who said this. I could be wrong on that, but he says that if you're going to take an immediate exit, approximately a 4x EBITDA multiple, which is essentially the profit of the practice after the doctor's salary, is going to be about equivalent to a 3 to 4 year work back with a 9x multiple. And Chip contested that. And he says, no, it's not. And Chip is right. On the surface, you are getting more money by doing that work back and getting the 9x multiple. There's no question about that. But what I think was not articulated correctly is that if you were willing to work an additional 3 years in the first place, if you worked in your practice, taking home the salary plus that EBITDA, plus the tax deduction, all of that, you are coming out ahead if you work 3 more years as your own owner and then sell at a lower multiple, say a 4x multiple at the end of those 3 years. So let's discuss that in general. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, David, because I know you've had a lot to say on this topic. I know where you stand on it. But first of all, what do you guys think of my logic there? Do you see anything wrong with that? And then David, tell us your thoughts on this DSO dynamic in general.
Yeah, Chris, I want to hear what you have to say about it, because Andy and I and Brian and I have been talking about this whole weekend, and for every ski trip for the last 3 or 4 years since, I remember Brian the first time told us that he was considering selling, and we had this is the beauty of a ski trip, is the lift ride from the base of the lift to the top of the mountain, and the 10 minutes where you're locked in a conversation, and we've had many conversations about this. But Chris, what are your thoughts on it?
Definitely. Well, we explored it. We had Chip actually come in and gave us a multiple that was impressive. But then I did the math and I came up to kind of the same thing that Andy came in my limited understanding of this kind of thing. I'm certainly not a CPA or anything, but I found that at about 3 years would be that kind of break even point. And it didn't make sense because I knew I wanted to practice longer for us. And then I just kind of thought about it logically. And I'm just thinking about this, not knowing all the details and the fancy numbers that they throw at you and the ways to tax shift and all that. But I thought, okay, so you're bringing someone in that's going to get a profit. You also have somebody coming in that's like brokering this thing. And where's all this money coming from? And like, where does it go? And then you don't get all that cash up front. You get some of it as retained equity, and that equity can turn to zero. And a lot of times it does. And they don't talk about that very much, but a lot of times it just goes bankrupt and it's gone. But if it recaps, hey, like MB2, you could really do well. But again, it's something that's not in your control, and it's kind of like taking some chips off the table. And I know some friends that have done that and were successful. So for me, it did make sense. Also, I wanted full control of my practice. I worked forever to get where I am, and I don't want to be second in line anymore, or really ever. The ability to shift my schedule and to go where I want to, or go on a ski trip, or go to 3 days or 2 days or whatever I want, bring an associate. You give all that up because you are turning over the hand to someone else. Now, if you want to get out and you get a great deal, maybe it's good for you. But the idea that you come out way, way ahead, I just don't see it. It doesn't make sense to me. But again, it totally depends on your goals. My goal is I want to be a private practitioner for a while. I want to have the say, and when I'm ready to hand it over, then I'll explore things. But I wish it could still be with maybe another young doc who wants to carry on the legacy of the practice. I've seen some DSOs where, just again, where's the money all coming from? Are the staff going to take a hit? Who's taking a hit? It's probably you. It's probably your team. I just don't see it. Most people that said that they've brought on a DSO have said that, well, they're not taking over the marketing. I'm still doing my own marketing, or I'm still doing this. Like, what's really changed? So, I mean, I think if you're at the top of the pyramid, you could be one of the sweetheart deals when you're starting your own practice, or you're starting the beginning of the DSO and you're at the top. Yeah, it could be great. But I think a lot of those on the bottom, I don't know if they do as well, to be honest. And so for us, we're not interested, probably not interested for a while, but I'm curious to hear your takes on it.
I mean, I pretty much echo what you said, but I'll let Brian. It seems like Brian has something he wants to say. And this is where I think it's really valuable because Brian's gone through this. I think I really echo a lot of what you just said, Chris, and I'll get to my thoughts in a second, but let's let Brian.
Sure. Well, so I think one thing that's important to point out is that there's truth to all the sides, right? I think it's not this or that, and our minds often we have these debates. Well, is it good to sell or is it bad to sell? We want to somehow categorize it's this way or that way. It's not this or that. The point of these conversations is to show that there are permutations. It's not what is right or what is true, because we can all find an example of a situation that worked out actually how, this one guy did, and his equity blew up, and look at what happened to this guy or this woman. Okay. And we can always find the person that their equity went to zero, and look, it's a failure. So we can always find an example to support that our argument is true, because guess what? It is true. Because guess what? It did happen. It has happened. Yeah. So I think it comes down to values. Like Chris, you mentioned being a private practice owner and having autonomy, essentially. Statistics and probability and risk tolerance. And to view something in its wholeness, having sold to a DSO, I try to see the whole of everything as at least a goal of mine, even, including myself. Of course, there's always a shadow side. Of course, there's always a trade-off. There's a trade-off to everything in life. We talked about the trade-off to studying more. Well, then I give up some control of my statistical probability of getting into dental school then goes down if I give less effort. Therefore, I'm going to give more effort because it increases my likelihood, right? So I think you just have to, it comes down to, well, there's always pros and cons. There are always trade-offs. There are downsides to doing it, for sure. There are definitely downsides to doing it. And guess what? It doesn't always work. So if someone's coming and saying, hey, it's really, well, you have to be, what you have to accept if you're going to do it is, but what if this doesn't happen? Like we talked about, how to start living and stop worrying. For me, it was like, well, what if my equity goes to 0? Is it still worth it?
Did you say how to stop living and start worrying?
Yeah, it's how to stop worrying. Stop worrying.
Did I say that?
How to stop worrying and start living.
Freudian slip right there.
I think that's
that would have been a bestseller. That would have been a bestseller, but
I don't think I need much help.
He couldn't actually publish it. He couldn't publish it because he was just too consumed with his own anxiety. It never actually hit. It never came into existence. No, but my point is, like for me, I was like, okay, I know that my equity may become 0. Okay, sit in that for a second. It may become 0. Are you okay with it still? Yes, I'm okay with it. Okay, why? Because of this and that and the other reason. And so I won't lose sleep if that happens. Of course, I don't want that to happen. Again, I want to do everything I can to make sure that things go well and not give up the things I value, like good patient care, like clinical autonomy, this type of thing, right? But you have to accept, well, there are going to be trade-offs, and there are going to be times that it doesn't work. And then if you think, well, but I made the wrong choice. Well, no, you just happened to be one of the people that it didn't work for. Or you happen to be one of the people that did work for. But to sit here and say, is it right or wrong to sell? Is it good or bad? What's the right answer? They're both right and they're both wrong.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. We do this so often. I find in politics, of course, it's the easiest example. We do it in religion. We do it in our profession. We do it all the time. So I think it's good to say there is validity to both sides. Yes.
Yeah.
Are there some things that I don't love about it? Yeah, of course there are. Are there some things I love about it? Yes. Are there some great things about it? Yeah. Are there some things that kind of suck and haven't been like I hoped? Yeah, there have been. And that's just the honest truth.
I just think for me, I want the smoke and mirrors gone. Like, lay this out for me. What does this look like? I think sometimes the sale tactics worry me a little bit. Is this EBITDA really what it truly is? And it's hard for us with our background to understand it. So,
well, that is one thing. The calculation of EBITDA has been changing over the past several years. So yes, it is different now. There was a Kane Waters lecture at the AAO recently where they go in and they actually analyze how the offers now look similar. The multiple is what people look at, and that has stayed the same, but the actual, what that multiple represents has shifted, and it's not as good of a deal as it was, say, 5 years ago. Not to mention let's just address the elephant in the room. We talked about this today as well. There is a pyramid scheme element to this. That is part of the deal here. That's not the whole deal. I don't want to say this is a pyramid scheme, but it's sort of a hybrid, So, and it all has to do with that equity, because part of the biggest way they're growing this equity is through acquisitions, or at least that's how it was 5 years ago. We're not seeing the same volume of acquisitions anymore. Interest rates have gone up. It's harder to get the capital to invest. And because of that, someone is going to be left holding that equity bag. David, what you had a point.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I think one of the biggest factors with this whole thing is the fact that while deals at some point were cash up front, they've now shifted to cash and equity, with this equity being very illiquid. And when it becomes a major part of your net worth, it's a major gamble, in my opinion. And because of the fact that it's illiquid. And like the way that they grow is through acquiring new practices. That's what increases the multiple when they try to recap. And if they can't buy new offices, and then it's again, the big elephant in the room is what happens when the retiring doctors leave at 5 years, right?
Exactly.
So I think for me, there's the people it makes the most sense for is somebody who's 5 years from retirement and they want a guaranteed sale. They know they're selling in 5 years no matter what. Then okay, that makes sense. But this comes back to the conversation. I remember when Brian was just debating doing this, it was like 4 or 5 years ago. And we were on the lift, and Brian said, I asked him, well, what are your, because really it comes down to motivations. What are your motivations and why you're doing it, right? And one of the things that Brian mentioned as something that he was looking forward to with the deal is that they give you a lot of cash up front, right? And you get this cash. Mm-hmm. And then I said, well, what are you going to do with the cash? And he said, well, I'm going to invest it in various, things. And I was like, so what you're doing is you're selling your income producing asset to invest.
I knew that.
To invest. Yeah. And he knew it. I mean, he's smart.
I willingly did that.
Yeah.
Like that was a good trade-off for me.
So you're selling your income producing asset to buy a different income producing asset, whether it's real estate or stocks or things like that.
But to leverage it up front, I have more immediately working for me, and I'm using compounding interest with time and a bigger bolus.
Right. And there's
a bigger bolus right now with more time. Okay. Right. For me, that made sense.
Right.
But again, like, what do you value? Well, did I see myself at that practice 10, 15, 20 years down the line? Well, that's what you have to ask yourself, right?
Right.
And I think another important thing is here, going back to, Econ 110, of course, we can't escape the laws of economy in our profession. Mm-hmm. Why do we think we can escape the laws of economy? Supply and demand. These are simple concepts, and somehow we think we can cheat these things or somehow avoid them or somehow get under them or around them or buy them.
We're being sold that we can cheat those, correct? Like that's part of the pitch is that in some way there's a little bit of like financial alchemy going on here. And to your point there, if you're growing just by acquisition of additional practices, well, let's back up even farther than that. You said that this is a great point. You're selling your income producing asset in order to invest that money in what you could perceive to be a better income producing asset. Now, there's a couple of things that have to hold true for that logic to play out. First of all, you have to have faith that your practice is not going to grow at the same rate as whatever you're going to invest that in, whether it be real estate or not. And that could be a very logical reason to sell. However,
or it could just be what you want.
Why would someone want to buy a practice like that? And where does it end? If everyone is selling because they think that their practice has reached the peak, and now I've squeezed the sponge as much as I can. I pumped up the EBITDA to sell, cash out, go into something that still has growth potential. If they're buying up a lot of these practices, which I kind of think they are. I mean, like just from an outsider's perspective, it seems like they're buying practices at the top of their game and not practices with a lot of like undervalued practices with a lot of potential. Now they will sell you on that. Like, yeah, with our systems, we're going to help you grow. But I'm not sure that's played out. Just from talking to people across multiple DSOs, I'm not sure that's playing out exactly right. At the end of the day, I think that the majority of that increase in the multiple down the road at the recapitalization event is contingent on continuing to acquire practices. And that's where I say it gets to be a little bit of a pyramid scheme, because at some point you're going to run out of practices to buy to pump the volume for the early people. And again, if you can make that cash up front, if that cash up front makes enough sense for you to sell, including the work back and the opportunity cost involved, then great, then do it. But, I think you just have to go into these things eyes open with a clear understanding of your own goals.
Well, let me just say one thing that I think is important. I think anyone wanting to do this needs to, having done it, needs to understand the deal, needs to understand, again, like we said, what could go wrong. Okay, well, what would I do then? And have integrity, meaning do your part of the bargain. Like I've always felt like, hey, whatever I sign my name to, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that because I gave my word. I gave my word, so I'm going to do that. And I can. But then also, it's a partnership, right? So then you would expect them then to do their part too, right? So it's always hey, I can't expect my partner here to do their part if I'm not willing to do mine. But you do. I mean, it is a partnership, so you have to know like, well, who am I in partnership with? And what's the relationship there? And so it's like any other relationship. It involves trust and it involves some faith and involves some hard work, but not to. So yeah, things can go great and things can not go well, just like anything else. And you have to know what you're getting into and if you'd be okay with it. And if you don't think you would, don't do it. And if you do think you would, do it. And guess what? It might not work out, and it might. So it's not that complicated in the end. just be willing to accept the pros and cons, the trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you were just saying, the key is for people, and I worry about some people who are impressionable who don't understand the business side of things and don't understand the potential risks that they're entering into with these contracts, because they're sold a bill of goods of, well, we are going to recap. We are going to, our last deal did this. You talk about like past experiences doesn't predict the future. Just because their last deal recapped at a 5x of what the initial it's that stuff is all. You have to be really aware that that's a risk. That's a gamble. So with your practice, are you willing to gamble whatever that percentage of the sale? If it's 50% cash, 50% equity, are you willing to gamble that 50%? And just understanding the risk associated with it, just so people, that's my thought.
Well, and that's the whole side. And that's why I think this is actually a really important conversation to have. If we value truth, if we value wholeness, you have to look at both sides. And there's so much validity to what you're saying. Having gone through it and done it, I can see both sides. I really can. And so I think that it is important that everyone knows that it's not this way or that way. Nothing is. You yourself are not this way or that way. Sometimes you're this way and sometimes you're that way. And then when you behave that way, that your this self is like, well, I hate that. But they're both a part of you. And so we can't eliminate the fact that all these points are valid and there's no right or wrong, but it's necessary to dive into the pros and cons here. And I think any narrative that's being pushed that's it's all this way or it's pretty much always this way, don't worry about it, is the wrong narrative, because that's not how life is. Look at the messiness
It's
of
never
life.
all in. That's the most, we said that today. It's the most aggravating thing to hear is that this will always work for every person. And like,
It's too simplistic.
it's just not, that should be obvious, but gosh. Yeah.
But can't you see how our minds still do that? Our minds still grasp onto this concept of wanting to be this way or that way, this way or that way. It's never this way or that way. Sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's that way. So you just have to be willing to live with that. So again, align yourself to what are your values? What can you live with?
Don't fall into the FOMO too of like, oh, this is like so hot, you got to jump on right now. And then people start to worry about it. And then the anxiety gets there. And then they just kind of sign on the line because they're tired of thinking about it so much. A lot of people, that happens, where they really thought about it and then they just jump for it. But go in eyes wide open, get all the information, ask all the questions, talk to a bunch of people, those that succeeded and those that didn't, and then make a logical, educated decision.
And on that note, I do want to end, as always, with a couple of pearls from our guest, Dr. David White. So, David, tell us, give us your top pearls.
Yeah, I've got a couple good ones to share. Yeah, I would say my first one I love to share with people, and I do this whenever I present at schools or things like that, is living your life with an attitude of gratitude to being the key to success and happiness in life. So that mindset of an attitude of gratitude is critical. My kids have heard me use the phrase attitude of gratitude hundreds, if not thousands of times.
It rhymes, so it must be true.
Yeah, exactly. And I've tried to incorporate that into my practice. And so there's two ways that happens. Number one, I don't put braces on a patient until the patient has said thank you to their parents and given them a hug.
Love that, dude.
Yeah. So
that's great.
Because so many kids today just assume their parents owe them braces because they're a teenage American. And I want them to understand that this is a big sacrifice, both financially and of their parents' time.
Yeah.
So I don't put them on until they say thank you. Then on the flip side, the way it comes back is at the very end of treatment, I don't take the braces off until they have demonstrated gratitude. So at the check everything appointment, I tell them this information, which is basically, you're going to be coming back in a couple of weeks, and whether I take your braces off is dependent on whether you have demonstrated gratitude to your parents. So I let them determine what that is. I usually tell the parent, what's your language of love? Do you like acts of service, words of affirmation, however you like to receive love? And then the kid has to do something. So, some of the best experiences I've had in my practice have been hearing when they come back what they did for their parents and what it meant to the parents. And so that's awesome. That's been huge. That's like the subtle marketing that you do that really builds a relationship between you, the parents, and the kids, and to some degree can have an impact and an influence on the kids that you're working with.
That's it. I think it's not just marketing. You're actually incorporating real life lessons. You're making a meaningful difference in this kid's life that can happen to benefit you too in your practice, but ultimately you're doing something bigger than what you or your practice.
Yeah. Right. So an example of this is I remember this one time I had a parent and it was just middle of just a random appointment. And I could tell there was something off between the kid and the mom. Like, it was a little awkward. And I said, hey, when was the last time you gave your mom a hug? And the kid's like, just teenage boy. And I was like, hey, go give your mom a hug real fast. And so he stands up, gives his mom a hug, sits down. And that's all, the last that I know about it until his mom, don't want to start crying, but until his mom leaves a review on our office Google page, basically just going on about how they hadn't been talking. And that experience is what caused them to kind of come back together and start their relationship over again. Uh-huh. And so anyways, it was a really touching thing for me. So anyways, attitude of gratitude.
That made me choke up, bro.
Yeah. It was really touching. You can go to my pediatric dental specialist and orthodontics reviews and you can find it. It's about 8 paragraphs of this mom telling the story.
I'll have ChatGPT summarize it for me.
So the second one is having a comfort animal. So we have, my dog is a 12-pound golden doodle. And because my daughter was allergic to dogs, we got her. And from 3 or 4 weeks old, we started bringing her to the office little by little, started training her. And so every new patient consult, she comes and lays down on the patient. Anytime the kid is nervous or anxious, she comes over and lays down on him. I cannot tell you the decrease in everybody's stress, both me, my staff, my patients, and the parents, when this happens. When a child is crying, because let's say it's a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, you're putting an expander in, they won't open their mouth and they're crying and screaming. Yeah. Like, what do you do? And you put a dog in their lap and it breaks the fear cycle. And all of a sudden they go from this is what's going to happen. This is going to hurt. And they're like, oh, petting dog. And they just start petting the dog. And then, you're like open and they're like, okay. And they open their mouth and it just makes everybody's life better. I can't tell you. So it's been a great thing for us. Obviously there's some complications associated with it. If anybody wants to ask me, I can
Brian, I wouldn't recommend that for your dog after this weekend. This dog, I've never seen a dog jump so high. Like it could probably clear my head.
Dude, he has some hops, man.
Yeah, he does. But obviously you need the right dog for that to work. I mean, you could very easily go the opposite direction by creating more anxiety.
So anyway, so the first one, attitude of gratitude. Second one, is the having a comfort animal. Third is just the books to read. I know everybody loves to share books that they've read, and we've talked about one of them on my list. So obviously there's How to Win Friends and Influence People and How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. If anybody is listening.
Are you sure that was the right name of the book?
Yes. If you have not read those 2 books, just put it on the list and make sure it happens. The third one is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey.
Yes.
And then the last one, which is one that a lot of people probably don't know about, it's How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. Mm-hmm. He was a professor at Harvard Business School. And it's talking about the people who put time and effort into the things that end up not mattering at the end of their lives. Mm. It's crazy, right? Mm. So it's really just processing at the end of your life, and you're starting to look back in your life. How will you measure it? On, is it the experiences you had with your family? Is that how much money you made? I mean, all those various things. Really stop and think about it and devote the time and effort to the things that you want at the end of your life to have been proud of.
There's a song in that play, Rent, that's all about that, like the 5,000, 2,500, 600 minutes. Right, like, how do you measure a year?
Right.
Yeah.
So
know thyself.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you guys, thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. I love all you guys, and it's been great hanging out for the last hour.
Yeah, man, it's been great.
It's been awesome, man. I can't wait till next year. And then Teeters, don't forget, you better live in fear, man, because when you come back, you got 2 initiations. And
I think that's inspiring me to come back. I don't know.
All right, forget that. We'll tell you about it when you get here.
And the great thing is, man, we need you back, man. We need you back. Of course, we had such a great time, but.
Well, thank you all for listening. If you haven't already, like I said, like, comment, subscribe. Otherwise, you will experience FOMO like no other. And thanks again to our guest, David, for being here. Looking forward to next year, our next snowboarding trip, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Later.
Thanks.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.